Brief history of Russia.
Then this question here is from Alois Gurtner, and he asks what I know about Russia, because he does not understand why the states or their leaders and large parts of the European population are so full of hatred towards Russia. As you can read here yourself, he also asks what I can tell him about how it is that a comedian and fool is at the helm in Ukraine and can beg for weapons everywhere, and thus wage war against Russia. Ukraine is also a corrupt country that he knows very well because he has worked there for a long time, and also traveled there and got to know many human beings, and knows from many of them that they are Russia-friendly. Contrary to what the newspapers and TV news say, many Ukrainians, as you can read for yourself here, want to belong to Russia and be administered by it, he writes. He also asks here whether I know anything about the old history of Russia and Ukraine, because that would interest him.
Yes, he writes that, as I read here. Do you know anything about both states and how they came about?
Not much, just what I learned from your grandfather when he took me through the past and explained this and that. I am afraid I do not know much more, and I can only explain a little of what I learnt from Svath, because the whole of his teachings on the subject would go far too far. So I will just briefly explain a little and hope that this will be enough to give you an impression. I also have an article from InfoSperber that says a few things that are certainly of interest and which I will add to this. But what I want to say first is the following, which your grandfather Svath taught me and which I will now reproduce here, at least as far as I can still remember it after almost 80 years. It is not very much, but I think it will be enough to answer the questions. Actually, the history of Russia goes far back into the past, and it was called something completely different in ancient times, and subsequently had various other names. The history actually goes back to the Scandinavian Vikings, namely to their prince, who was called Rurik or something like that, and who came to the country around 850 or so and founded the very first dynasty. In the course of time, around the 8th and 9th centuries, after Emmanuel, the name Kievan Rus began to be used for the area or country that is now called Ukraine. This developed into a tsardom in ancient times, around 1540 or 1550 or so, when it was called Kievan Rus, and later became the Grand Duchy of Muscovy, an empire. This is what I was taught by Svath. And what I still know from Svath is what is also being asked. I can really only answer the question about why Russia has been so hated for so long by saying that the low intelligence of Earthlings knows no bounds, and that there is actually a clear answer to this, which I will give. There has always been a mixture of political and cultural factors that contribute to this hatred, but they are fundamentally ridiculous. This is because, fundamentally, the hateful rejection and enmity that is harbored towards Russia is cultivated by various actors of the old and new times for reasons of envy, abnormal imperiousness, etc. But first this, the vast territory of Russia was already inhabited by human beings almost 560,000 years ago, as I saw and experienced together with Svath. But around 140,000 years ago, a climatic change began, which lasted until about 40,000 years ago and changed everything. This was the time when the human beings of that time spread across the country again, resettling in the climatically good zones and fishing in the rivers. Russia had always been a vast territory, which became more and more populated as a result of its habitation and reclamation, and consequently, the area of the territory grew and expanded. In much later times, immigration took place, as a result of which everything took its course, as is now historically known as a result of research, as well as the fact that Russia, as a huge country, is partly European and partly Asian. Svath has clearly established that Russia has been hated by the Western states, especially Europe and America, since time immemorial, since the 1750s to be precise. He clarified the whole thing as early as the beginning of the 18th century. The hatred of Russia originated in Germany, but it spread to America, and the German emigrants and Prussian emigrants who emigrated and settled there. These were, of course, united as people of Prussian origin or simply German emigrants. However, they already felt themselves to be Americans, who in the 1750s harbored such megalomaniacal ambitions that Russia, which was a European superpower at the time and whose capital was St. Petersburg, belonged to America. This was because Alaska was a Russian territory on the American continent. Alaska was indeed idiotically sold off to America by Tsar Alexander II in 1867 due to a lack of money at the time. Well, Prussia was a powerful kingdom that emerged in the 17th century and was only dissolved again after the end of the World War from 1939 to 1945. If I remember correctly, Prussia even became the German Empire in 1870 or so, ruled by a Prussian as emperor. This Prussian Empire was the biggest military might against Russia, and secretly had ambitions to cash in on Russia. But this could not be realized, which led to hatred, which spread not only to the Prussian people, but also to the ethnic Germans in America, and also to the peoples of other European states. And this hatred against Russia has survived to this day, and no one can explain where it comes from. But the fact that I have now explained how and where this hatred comes from, which Svath explained to me in detail, will probably not be accepted and will be accused of being a lie, because as usual, the truth will also be concealed here. What I do know is that since then, America's hegemony delusion has been trying by all means not only to discredit the great Russia all over the world, but also to bring it under American rule, and to dictatorize it and make it disappear from the political world stage as a might of its own. But to date, America has not yet succeeded in doing this, because Russia is a great power and a regional power that also has great potential in terms of nuclear weapons. Furthermore, it turned out that in more recent times, many states belonged to Russia when the Russian Empire was created, such as Armenia, Azerbaijan, Estonia, Georgia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Latvia, Lithuania, Moldova, Poland, and also Tajikistan, Turkmenia, Turkmenistan, Ukraine, Uzbekistan, Belarus, as it is called today. Then, finally, the large part of the vast territory became the Soviet Union USSR in 1922, which ended with the resignation of USSR President Mikhail Gorbachev in December 1991, whereby the name Russia was publicized and the state came into being as the Russian Federation. And that is the summary in a nutshell, because there would be too much to say to summarize everything important.